history doesn't scream its secrets, it murmurs them. Through crumbling parchments, blood-stained coronation robes, and the hushed breath of scandal echoing down stone corridors. In the twisted halls of power, where kings were gods and queens were pawns, reality was often stranger than anything fiction could conjure. Behind the gold thread tapestries and gilded crowns lived a theater of deception, lust, betrayal, and unthinkable ambition. And nowhere does that truth glisten more dangerously than in the tale of Enrique IV of Castile, a monarch so entangled in rumor, impotence, and political humiliation that history itself seems embarrassed to speak his name aloud. They called him Enrique the Impotent, a title less fit for a king, more like a cruel joke etched into eternity. He was tall with northern features, blonde hair, pale skin, cold blue eyes, a walking contradiction in a fiery Iberian court. His first marriage to Blanca of Navarre remained unconsummated for over 13 years. Yes, 13. In an age where royal heirs were the currency of dynastic survival, this wasn't just scandalous, it was catastrophic. To quiet whispers, Enrique ordered official scribes to wait outside the royal bedchamber on wedding night, poised to document the act of consummation, but their scrolls stayed blank. Blanca left the marriage untouched. Enrique, desperate to preserve his honor, claimed dark forces had sabotaged his manhood, blaming witchcraft, curses, anything but himself. The church, unwilling to test the supernatural, annulled the marriage, but it would be his second union to Juana of Portugal that dragged the monarchy into chaos. Juana was beautiful, bold, known to wear men's clothing, ride on horseback through palace halls, and speak with the authority of a woman who knew exactly how much power beauty could command. Still, the royal bedroom remained quiet. Enrique, in a last-ditch attempt at virility, submitted to potions made from bull's testicles and porcupine quills, a grotesque cocktail meant to stoke masculine fire. Desperate, he turned to a Jewish physician who pioneered a crude form of artificial insemination, using rudimentary syringes to force a miracle. And when Juana finally gave birth to a daughter, rejoicing turned to suspicion. The child, named Joanna, bore little resemblance to Enrique, but a striking likeness to Beltrán de la Cueva, a young court favorite known for his close, very close relationship with the queen. Courtiers began to whisper, mockingly calling the girl La Beltranea, a child born of scandal, a pawn in a game larger than any of them realized. But the story doesn't end in whispers. When Juana later gave birth to 2 more sons, both said to be fathered not by the king, but by the nephew of a bishop, the nobles had had enough. Uprisings began to rumble. The nobility declared Joanna a bastard, and in the chaos, another figure emerged. A teenage girl with steel in her veins, Isabella, Enrique's half-sister, unshakable, calculating, and unwilling to let bloodline drama destroy the throne. Isabella seized the narrative. With the cunning precision of a born ruler, she challenged her half-brother's legacy and took the crown of Castile by sheer political force. She then married Ferdinand of Aragon, not just for love or alliance, but to unite Spain under one kingdom. Together they built the foundations of the Spanish Empire, setting loose an age of conquest, colonization, and bloodshed that would reshape the world. But what's often forgotten is that their empire began with a whisper about a girl who might not have been her father's daughter, and a kingdom nearly torn apart by the humiliating silence in a royal bedchamber. This is told in a sad and far too often unforgiving. Now shift your gaze northward, across the Channel, to the chill of 15th century England, where the Wars of the Roses painted the soil red with ambition and revenge. In 1442, at Rouen in Normandy, a boy was born to Cecily Neville, a proud, imperious duchess whose very presence commanded awe. She named him Edward. Years later, he would claim the throne as Edward IV, founder of the Yorkist dynasty, a king who ruled with brutal strength and infamous charm. But Edward was born under a cloud, a shadow darker than war or treason. His father, Richard, Duke of York, was far from Cecily during the time Edward would have been conceived, away in France, commanding armies for the 100 Years' War. So who was in her bed? The court buzzed. Had the Duchess found comfort in another man's arms? Was the future king bastard? Some whispered of a common archer, nameless, faceless, whose blood now pumped through the veins of England's sovereign. Others said the father was noble, but not noble enough. Still, the gossip might have faded, if not for Edward himself. He didn't resemble his siblings. While they were short, with dark hair and compact builds, Edward towered over them. Over 6 feet tall, golden-hailed with striking northern features, a mirror image of no one in his supposed family. In a time when lineage meant everything, such differences weren't just noticed, they were weaponized. Decades later, during the reign of his brother, Richard III, this old rumor would be revived with deadly precision. Richard, eager to claim the crown for himself, declared that Edward had been illegitimate all along, a usurper born of sin and deception. Whether this was political propaganda or uncomfortable truth remains a mystery, but it raises a question that shakes the foundations of monarchy itself. If a king's bloodline can be doubted, what does the crown really rest upon? A birthright or a lie? From the crumbling towers of Castile to the war-soaked fields of England, these stories echo the same chilling truth. Behind every polished curtains of royalty, behind every polished crown and sainted lineage, there exists a second history, untamed, uncomfortable, and raw, one that refuses to die, because history doesn't forget. It waits, in the margins, in the shadows, in the silence of bedrooms where heirs were or weren't conceived. And in that silence lies a power greater than any sword. The power to unravel everything. Power may be draped in velvet and crowned in gold, but its roots are often buried in rot. And if you dare dig deep enough, what you'll find beneath the thrones of Europe is not majesty, but madness. Whispers of treason, blood rituals disguised as medicine, and royal bloodlines so twisted they bordered on the incestuous. In Part 1, we walked the cold halls of Castile and the battle-stained fields of England. But now, we descend deeper, into the heart of royal delusion, into Sweden, 18th century, where an opera box became a death sentence and a king's obsession with absolute control shattered a kingdom from within. His name was Gustavus III, a man of style, spectacle, and increasingly paranoia. He fancied himself a philosopher king draped in Enlightenment ideals. But beneath the powdered wigs and poetic letters pulsed the fragile ego of a ruler desperate for legacy. Gustav surrounded himself with art, theater, and allegory. But politics is never a play, and he forgot that real enemies don't deliver monologues. They smile at court, toast your victories, and wait. For years, he alienated the nobility, stripping them of power, centralizing authority in a way that, to them, felt like tyranny dressed as reform. He rewrote the Constitution, he silenced the press. He turned Sweden into his personal chessboard, and every noble became a pawn, or a threat. But Gustav's greatest crime wasn't political, it was personal. He turned the sacred ritual of monarchy, the birth of an heir, into a grotesque performance. You see, Gustav had no children. Rumors swirled that he was unable or unwilling to consummate his marriage. A monarch with no heir was a ticking time bomb. So, Gustav devised a plan so bizarre it could only be true. He arranged what would later be described as a scientifically supervised conception in which a nobleman was allegedly present during his union with the queen, guiding the process, as though tutoring him through intimacy. Whether he succeeded or not is unclear. What is clear is that soon after, a boy was born, Gustav IV. But the court exploded with speculation. The child looked more like the supervising noble than the king. It didn't matter. Gustav declared him legitimate. But legitimacy doesn't live in proclamations, it lives in belief, and the belief was shattered. One spring night in 1792, during a masquerade ball at the Royal Opera House in Stockholm, Gustav stepped into his private box. Cloaked figures surrounded him. One man approached, pressed a pistol into his side, and fired. The shot didn't kill him immediately. For weeks he lingered, his flesh blackening, his body rotting from the inside out, while Sweden whispered, "The king is dying, and maybe he deserved to." In his last moments, Gustav reportedly forgave his assassins, but his death wasn't just the end of a man. It was the end of an illusion that a king could control his story, because history always writes its own ending. But this disease of power wasn't confined to Sweden. Let's drift south into the chaos of revolutionary France, where silk slippers danced toward the guillotine, and the divine right of kings shattered like crystal under the weight of public rage. Louise XX and Marie Antoinette. Two names drenched in myth and blood. But before the shouts of revolution echoed through Paris, their marriage was already a battlefield. Louis, shy and awkward, was reportedly unable or unwilling to consummate his union for 7 years. 7 years of silence in the royal bed. Physicians were summoned, examinations conducted, embarrassingly detailed letters passed between royal relatives in Austria and France, discussing the shape and function of the king's anatomy. The theory? A tight foreskin. The solution? Surgery. But Louis hesitated. It was Marie who bore the brunt, labeled cold, frigid, foreign, as if it were her failure to conceive. The court turned on her. Pamphlets described her in vile, pornographic detail. Her face was painted onto the bodies of prostitutes in street propaganda. She became the scapegoat for every hunger pang in France. Even after the marriage was fixed and children were born, the damage was done. The people no longer saw her as a queen. They saw a monster in powdered hair. When the revolution came, it was swift. The palace stormed, the monarchy dismantled. Louis tried to plead for mercy. Marie stared down her accusers with terrifying calm, but dignity doesn't stop the blade. Their deaths weren't just executions. They were exorcisms. An entire nation purging itself of the lies it had been fed for. That royalty was divine, that bloodlines were sacred, that thrones were eternal. But here's the truth. History rarely says aloud, thrones are just chairs, and the people who sit on them are no more immune to dysfunction, desire, and disease than the lowest servant scrubbing palace floors. In fact, they're often worse. Because when you raise someone from birth to believe they are chosen by God, when you isolate them in halls of marble and obedience, you don't create greatness. You create delusion, and delusion in power is deadly. Whether it's Enrique blaming witches for his failure, Gustav staging intimacy like theater, or Louis fleeing his people in the dead of night, these aren't just royal scandals. They're human tragedies, pain dressed in ermine, humiliation beneath a crown. And yet, despite all the shame, the failures, the lies, the world kept watching, still does. Because somewhere deep inside us we're drawn to the fall. The moment the crown slips, the mask cracks, the truth oozes out. It's not just history. It's a mirror of who we are, of what we worship, of how easily greatness becomes grotesque. And if you think the past was cruel, wait until you hear what comes next. There is something terrifyingly eternal about the hunger for power. It rots the soul before it ever touches the crown. And in the cold corners of forgotten time, that hunger turned kingdoms into graveyards. Part 1 showed us the dangerous game of royal legitimacy. Part 2 peeled back the veil on monarchs undone by their own bodies, their own beds, their own lies. But now, we plunge into something darker, something older. the rituals, the medicines, the so-called cures that killed. This is not simply the fall of kings, it is the descent into madness disguised as healing. The cruel irony of a world where medicine bled you dry and priests offered arsenic in gold cups. And our descent begins with a whisper from ancient Egypt. The pharaohs were gods, or so they claimed, but even gods feared death. So they made bargains with it. Perfumed tombs, spells carved into sarcophagi, and one substance that passed like currency through royal veins, mumia. No, not just the word for mother in Latin tongues. This was something else, something obscene. Mumia was powdered human remains, literal, ground-up mummies, sold in apothecaries across Europe and consumed as medicine. To treat everything from headaches to plague, aristocrats crushed the dead and swallowed them. Pharaohs who once ruled the Nile were